Good morning, everyone. I hope your morning is going the way you want it to and that you're all well and happy. I'm going to talk about perfection today and the notion of perfection, why it's impossible, and the fact that things should be good enough if they are in fact good enough. And it's funny because I'm laughing to myself a bit now. Just a few minutes ago, I started this podcast and I had to go, well, I didn't have to, but I chose to go in and stop it and delete it because within seconds of me starting, my big old ginger cat came yowling and scratching into the room, demanding his breakfast in a very loud voice. And I thought, I really don't need to have this yahooing animal in the background while I'm trying to deliver a podcast or trying to do a recording. So I went back and I deleted it. So I literally shot myself in the foot this morning with my own message about the fact that nothing is perfect. And if it's good enough, it's good enough. And it probably would have been with my cat making his voice heard in the background. I'm sure it would still have been good enough for all of you, given that some of you probably like cats, others of you probably don't mind cats, and it probably would have been okay. But I did what we all so often do, and I succumbed to that notion that we're all labouring under, that we can't have anything in our delivery of anything that isn't as good as it humanly can be. And the cat is like felinely can be, as disruptive as possible. And I chose not to let him be part of the podcast. So I've only got myself to blame for not listening to my own message this morning. And it's funny because as I sit here, I can hear one of my dogs at the top of the stairs. She's bouncing a tennis ball down the stairs. So I apologise in advance for the thumping noises if you can hear those two, plus the fact that she's going to be down here in the next 30 seconds chasing after the ball and probably barking and snuffling and making a general nuisance of herself. So again, I'm doing this recording at home and life goes on around me as it does for all of us, and we get these distractions, we get these little marks on the delivery of what we're doing, and that's life. It's just life in all its imperfect glory. So apologies for whatever disruptive noises you're likely to hear as we go through this podcast this morning. Hey, life grand. There's always something that comes along when you least expect it. And for me, it's usually something to do with the animals. But that's how things are in my life. So I guess some of you will be able to relate. Okay, so the notion of perfection, we all know on some fairly basic level that there's no such thing as perfection, but it doesn't stop us wanting to continue to strive for it, does it? Just like me with this podcast first attempt this morning, I decided within a split second that it wasn't going to be good enough, so I went and did it again, started it again. And this is what we do. We constantly berate ourselves for not getting things right. We will start a process again because we think we haven't done the best we could with it to start with. And as a writer, you do feel that. You feel a lot of external pressure, and you also feel pressure from within yourselves to do things to the most perfect level that you're able to. Now, I'm a member of a handful of different writing groups on different social media platforms, and they're good places to be. Sometimes we go in there and we talk about stuff that we're working on. We ask for a little bit of guidance on different elements of the writing process and just generally gnash our teeth about the state of the nation and the little problems that beset us from time to time, like writer's block or where to put a comma in a series of commas in a sentence that's unusually long. And a lot of the feedback that we get in there is good and constructive, but some of it's not. Some of it is actually a little bit less than constructive. Some of it's a little bit brutal. Some of it is downright mean. And it's, I guess, in those groups you get a cross-representation of how society is in general, across all social media platforms and inputs that different people experience, whether it's putting stuff out there or having it critiqued or savaged by someone who's made an active conscious choice to be offended by what we've written. That kind of goes on all the time. And so I don't spend a lot of time in those groups because I think one of the things that comes out repeatedly is the the different ways in which people think something is good enough, like the structure and the construction, punctuation, various things. There are different standards internationally, which can make things a little bit tricky. If you're asking for a critique of something you've written in an English format, and an American person comes on and tells you that you've done it all wrong, and vice versa. That happens a lot, and yeah, Australian prose is a thing now too, apparently, from what I've read. So it's a bit of a minefield being out there and putting yourself out there for critique in any element of life. It doesn't just necessarily have to be about writing. And I guess some of you, this might resonate with you too, the fact that whatever it is you're trying to do to the best of your ability, there will be people around you for who it's still not good enough. People expect perfection of us. Even on some level where they know that doesn't exist, they still keep pushing for it. And we're very bad at putting pressure on ourselves to do things the best way we can. And that it really doesn't help, does it? I think we've got to just be, to quote the ever more hackneyed phrase, our own authentic self. We've got to let who we are drive what we do. And I think we've got to acknowledge our limitations, look at the best of what we can deliver, and sometimes take a step back and examine those limitations and see if we can push the boundaries a little bit more. Because usually when you do decide and discover where your own limitations are, there is a way of pushing through some of those, and that's okay. I mean, that actually helps to take things to the next level. It helps us with our sense of what we can and can't achieve, but it also enables us to say, yes, okay, well, we're still a long way from perfect, but that's just an ideal. I mean, perfection is just a fantasy. And in any case, I mean, even if you did achieve perfection in something, I mean, what would that feel like for the person that we're doing it for? Because it's all very subjective, and what one person thinks is the perfect solution or the perfect piece of work or the perfect dish that you've cooked, someone else is going to say that it isn't. So it's hard to know when these expectations arise, how true we are in meeting them anyway. I think that really what it has to come back to is that we do the absolute human best that we can. Now, I'm not a perfect writer in any shape or form. I'm a long way from perfect. No one is more in tune and appreciative of my faults and shortcomings as I am myself, and we're all our own worst critic. But I've got to a point in life where I've stopped being concerned with the formal structure of a piece of written work or following the rules that seem to be underlying a lot of what people observe in their critique of anything that you put forward. And I think really it just becomes you being that authentic person and being your authentic self. And I write from the heart. I write the way I speak, so there's no formality there really, but I've always been a wordy person as opposed to a numerical person. I was wordy before I even went to school, and I have always been interested and fascinated by the written word, the spoken word, the word that you can read. And along with most writers who have achieved publication and any level of success, there is an element of understanding sentence structure, the structure of how language is put together and offered to the masses. But I think certainly within the fiction realm, there is space to buck the trend, to kind of deviate a little way away from those rigid rules that keep everything formalized, and just explore with a little bit of flexibility what you can do around that. Some of my sentences are probably too long. Some of my commas are in the wrong place. And sometimes I don't always remember that my quotation marks have to go outside of my commas or my full stops. But it's my authentic voice. I write from the heart. Everything that I write comes straight from my heart. And my heart, like everyone's, is imperfect, and my prose is imperfect. And I have had a bad experience with editing anyway. I once sent a piece of my work out to a so-called professional to have it critiqued and edited. and to get some feedback on it. And she gave me some feedback, and she said, this is pretty good, but I've made a few changes. And oh my God, a few changes. What she gave back to me wasn't my work. It didn't even sound like my voice. It was completely unrecognizable from what I'd written and sent to her in the first place. And what she'd done was she'd formalized it according to the rules of sentence structure and the construction of where your verb goes as opposed to your noun, and all of that. She'd just taken it back to the bare bones, formalized way that things should be done, in inverted commas, probably with the full stop in front. So that went in the bin. I was just completely blown away by how much sticking to the rules changes everything about what you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it. So I learned something really valuable in that process. And I edit my own work now. I've always edited my own work since that moment, and I know that I sometimes get it wrong, but I don't have anybody messaging me saying, hey, look, this paragraph didn't make sense, or that sentence went on for far too long, or you had 3 commas in there instead of 2, or, nobody really criticizes that. If they're reading an authentic story that is coming from someone's heart, they will feel that, and the readers feel my voice. And people I know who have read my books that know me have said that they can hear my voice coming through the books, coming through the stories, and that to me is a lot more positive. That is a lot more valuable to me, that feedback, than any feedback I could get from someone who said, oh yes, your structure is amazing and everything is punctuated perfectly. I mean, sack that, right? I'm not interested in that. And I do sometimes get it wrong, but that is the whole point, that it ain't perfect, but for most people it's good enough. And if it's not, then that's okay. Not everybody likes what I write, and I'm okay with that, because I don't like everything I read. So there's nothing special or unique about me. I'm just a normal, average, everyday person who likes and dislikes certain genres of books. Certain things appeal to me, certain things don't in life, and everyone is the same. So there's no one writer anywhere in the world that appeals to absolutely everyone, and I've got that. But I think the way that I write, I think most people who do enjoy it aren't concerned with punctuation, aren't concerned with paragraph length and things like that. So I would never even try to change the way I do things, because as I said just before, it depends on who it's perfect for. I could do something and that one person says, God, that's absolutely fantastic. I've never read anything that good in all my life. And then the next person will say, well, that's the biggest pile of rubbish I've ever laid eyes on. So with the subjectivity being what it is, it's hard to justify trying so hard to please someone who expects us to be perfect when there's just no way we can be. It's a non-achievable ideal. And I guess what it really comes down to for all of us is to know that we're doing the absolute best that we can, and then there will be people for whom that's not good enough, and that's just the way life is. I mean, you can be the best you can be at anything, and someone will still be dissatisfied with it. So whether it's your boss, or whether it's your family, or whether it's your friends, or people that you meet up and do hobbies with, if you're in a situation where other people are expecting something of you and it doesn't come up to scratch for them, as long as it comes up to scratch for you, even though it ain't perfect, it's good enough. And that's where we have to let ourselves off the hook and say, right, there's no such thing as perfection. It doesn't exist. It's a terrible, terrible pressure. But I think really, if you can go to bed at night knowing that you've done the best you humanly can, that's good enough. I mean, for me, if I know that I've got a really important paragraph in a book that I'm writing that is very critical to the understanding of someone or a situation within that book, if it's a critical paragraph, if I can go to bed at night knowing I've done the best I can with that paragraph, it ain't perfect, but it's good enough, that's okay. I can sleep I can sleep okay. But if when we haven't done our best, we know we haven't, because we're all the experts on ourselves. But I think sometimes when someone is expecting something from us, whether or not we've cooked something well enough or read a bedtime story to the kids well enough, if someone feels like we've fallen short, it's worth a conversation, because at the end of the day, that pressure has to come off. And most importantly of all, we've got to take it off ourselves. I don't care now. If people don't like my books, that's okay. I don't care. But for the ones that do, even though there is no perfection in there at all, it seems to be good enough for most people. And at the end of the day, as long as we feel that we've done the best we can, other people just have to suck it up. And in some cases, if you haven't done the best you could, it's because someone else hasn't put you in a situation where you can. And it's okay to say, look, there are other elements contributing to getting in the way of this being the best piece of work, or this being the best lasagna, or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve in the perfectionist expectation. Then it really is a hard thing to try and be all things to all people. But if you're good enough for yourself, that's all it needs to be. So go and pick up a book, pick up a Teapot Cottage book, and read about some of the characters in the story who are arriving there in a screaming, hysterical heap and trying to figure out how to pull their lives back together. And that they know that when they do it, it's not going to be perfect. Their lives are never going to be perfect. Their relationships are never going to be perfect. But they try and get them to the best place where they can be. And that's never going to be perfect, but it's good enough.